The Young and the Restless spoilers Saturday's full episodes July 5, 2025 as the sun dipped below the orange-streaked skies of Genoa City and cast shadows over the lives of those entangled in its web. The fallout from one man's reappearance rippled outward in waves no one could have anticipated. Colin's survival, if it truly was him, was not just a whisper from the past, it was a detonation. A truth so destabilizing that it cracked the very foundations of the Newman family. Victoria stood in the grand hall of Newman Enterprises, frozen in disbelief, her fingers trembling as she reread the encrypted message she had received from an anonymous tipster. The man Kane had been working with, the man allegedly orchestrating a quiet siege against Chancellor Jabot and Newman Enterprises alike, was not just a strategist or a manipulator. He was her past. A man she had once met under another name, in another time, without realizing that he had been watching her for years. Claire, still piecing together her identity and searching for some semblance of trust in a world that had already betrayed her in childhood, watched Victoria fall apart. Her mother's strength had always been unshakable. Now, Victoria looked like she had aged a decade in a single hour. The realization that Aristotle Dumas, the international financial ghost they had fought against, might not only be alive but be someone connected to their family's darkest betrayals, threatened to unravel everything Victoria had rebuilt since Claire's return. Meanwhile, Adam stood at the edge of a choice that would once again divide his family and redefine his legacy. His decision to go to Nice was not made lightly. He knew that chasing Colin Dumas, whoever he was, meant reopening old wounds and risking new enemies. But the evidence he had collected, the moment he saw Kane and Colin sitting together, conspiring, confirmed that the danger was immediate. The threat to the Newmans wasn't hypothetical anymore, it was active. As much as he resented Victor, as much as he still questioned whether he'd ever be truly accepted as a son and not just a useful pawn, Adam couldn't watch his family fall without doing something. Before leaving, he met Chelsea at a quiet booth inside Society, the wine between them untouched for a long while as they processed the weight of what had been uncovered. Chelsea had been through so much, yet somehow remained grounded, perceptive, and strong in ways Adam didn't always acknowledge. He told her everything. About the secret room, the hushed voices, the unmistakable cadence of Colin's voice, and the plans for something larger than revenge. Something apocalyptic. Chelsea was stunned, but not speechless. She reminded Adam that he had survived worse, that he was, in fact, built for situations like this. And though he joked that he might not survive Victor's wrath for acting without permission, his eyes lingered on her as he leaned across the table and kissed her goodbye. There was something final in the way their lips met. Not necessarily an ending, but a chapter closing. Outside, standing in the shadows like a ghost of a plan yet to be revealed, was Holden Novak. Watching. Calculating. He observed Adam and Chelsea with silent precision, taking note of every glance, every pause, every whispered word. And as Adam left, Holden waited the appropriate number of seconds before stepping into the warm interior. He introduced himself casually, politely, almost disarmingly. Said he admired Chelsea's work. Asked to buy her a drink. But Chelsea, sharper than most gave her credit for, narrowed her eyes. She recognized him. Not from a magazine or a gallery, but from that very morning at Crimson Lights. He had been with Kane. He had spoken softly but intently, taking notes like an assistant or perhaps something else entirely. When she asked him about it, Holden deflected with charm. He was not Kane's employee, he claimed, only a man admiring a beautiful woman. But his eyes darted too quickly. His tone was just a bit too rehearsed. And Chelsea, for the first time in years, felt something stir beneath her skin, danger. Back at the Chancellor estate, Mariah Copeland sat in silence, her body rigid as a cold sweat dripped down the back of her neck. For days, she had been haunted by fragments of a night she couldn't fully piece together. A business trip turned nightmare. A drunken evening. A stranger. A scream. And then, a pillow. The image of her hands clutching a pillow while tears rolled down her face kept returning, like a static-laced memory from a different life. Had she hurt someone? Had someone hurt her? The uncertainty was eating her alive. She had confided in no one, not Tessa, not Sharon, not even her therapist. Because this wasn't just a memory. It was a threat. To her family, her reputation, her sanity. And she knew, deep down, that if she dug too deep, she might find something she was never meant to uncover. As Mariah spiraled and Chelsea began to question her safety, Victoria and Claire sat in quiet dread, unsure whether to tell the rest of the family that Colin had returned. They needed proof. Not just a theory. Because if they were wrong, they would be tearing open old wounds for nothing. But if they were right, they were already too late. Colin, or whoever he truly was, had already begun his next move. He wasn't coming for money or revenge alone. He was coming to dismantle the very idea of the Newman legacy. He had studied every weakness. Nick's impulsiveness. Victoria's guilt. Adam's isolation. Claire's fragile trust. And most of all, Victor's pride. The man who had once built empires from ash would soon have to face the one enemy he had long believed buried. And Adam, unknowingly walking into the lion's den in Nice, was now the only one with eyes on the ground. He would have to decide quickly. Expose Colin to the world, or use what he knew to draw him out, at the risk of becoming a target himself. At crimson lights, beneath the soft hum of the espresso machine and the distant clinking of mugs, Tessa sat in a half-lit corner, her fingers curled tightly around a lukewarm coffee cup she had yet to drink. The world outside moved with its usual indifference, people walked, children laughed, a breeze stirred through the trees, but inside her, everything was still. When Daniel approached, his presence carried with it the weight of a shared history and the promise of empathy, but even he couldn't fully grasp the storm behind Tessa's distant eyes. She told him, slowly and carefully, that Mariah had moved out. The words didn't sound real, even to her own ears. It wasn't a separation. It wasn't a fight. It was something worse, a quiet unraveling. Something she had felt coming but had hoped would never arrive. Daniel was surprised. He tried to mask it, but his tone betrayed him. He said he never thought Mariah would be the one to walk away. But Tessa shook her head slowly and told him the truth. Mariah didn't think she was leaving her. She thought she was protecting her. And that truth was harder to swallow than any betrayal. It meant that Mariah was slipping into darkness alone, believing it was an act of love. Daniel asked if Mariah had said anything about that night. The night that now hung like a shadow over everything. Tessa admitted she hadn't. All she knew was that Mariah had been drunk. That she had come home broken, shivering, eyes unfocused and filled with something Tessa couldn't name. Tessa had told her it didn't matter. That nothing she had done could change how she felt. That love, real love, wasn't conditional. But Daniel's words cut deeper than she expected when he asked if she was truly sure. Could she imagine a scenario where she would walk away? Tessa wanted to scream that she couldn't. That no matter what memory haunted Mariah, no matter what regret clung to her like smoke, she wouldn't abandon her. But doubt, as quiet and patient as death itself, had already begun to whisper in her mind. What if whatever Mariah remembered wasn't just a mistake, but a crime? And somewhere beyond that conversation, far from the safety of the cafe and the comfort of shared words, Mariah walked alone through an observation platform on the outskirts of town. The wind whipped around her, but she barely felt it. Her arms wrapped around her body, not from cold, but from guilt that pulsed like a fever. "What did I do?" she whispered into the emptiness, her voice drowned by the wind. And then the memories came, disjointed, blurry, but relentless. The bar. The man. The drinks. The laughter that turned into confusion. The stumble through a hallway. The closing of a door. And then, silence. Until the vision of her own hands clutching a pillow, her face wet with tears, returned like a haunting. She didn't know what had happened after that. She didn't know what he had done. Or what she had done to stop it. But the guilt had become a second skin. She remembered waking up alone. She remembered the bed sheets tangled. She remembered the absence of noise, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And then, nothing. But that nothingness was more terrifying than any memory. Elsewhere, at the hospital, time moved differently. Cole, lying pale and exhausted beneath stark fluorescent lights, looked into the eyes of the daughter he had barely begun to know. Claire sat at his side, her grip on his hand tight, refusing to let go of a man who had just begun to show her what unconditional love could look like. Victoria stood behind her, silent and devastated. She had spent years believing Cole had died. She had spent more years resenting the past they could never reclaim. And now, just as healing felt possible, just as their daughter had returned, the universe was stealing him away again. Cole, with every ounce of strength he had left, told them it was time to say goodbye. His body was failing. The disease, so subtle at first, so easily ignored, had reached a point of no return. Claire's voice cracked as she pleaded with him not to give up, not to vanish when she had just begun to believe in family again. But Cole only smiled, a soft, tired smile. He told her he had made peace with it. That the war within him was over. That loving her, even for a short while, had made it all worth it. Victoria turned away. She couldn't bear to see the man who had once been her future reduced to this fragile, fleeting moment. She had built empires. Fought wars. Raised children. But she couldn't save Cole. And the helplessness was unbearable. In that hospital room, the past and present collided. The woman who had once loved Cole, the daughter born from their tragic parting, and the man who now lay dying, each bound together by love, regret, and time. Claire leaned down and whispered something only Cole could hear. A promise, a prayer, a final goodbye. And for a moment, the world outside the hospital vanished. Back in the heart of Genoa City, the ripple effects of their grief had yet to fully emerge. But in the days to come, Mariah's breakdown would deepen. Her memories would sharpen. And the truth of what happened that night, whether she had been a victim or something far more complex, would come into the light. Daniel would find himself drawn into a mystery he never asked for. Tessa would be forced to choose between her heart and her own safety. And as Adam arrived in Nice, prepared to expose Colin or whatever impersonator had taken his name, he would find himself tangled in a web far more dangerous than corporate sabotage. Because Colin, or the man now claiming to be Aristotle Dumas, was playing a game deeper than vengeance. He was targeting the very concept of family. Of loyalty. Of legacy. And he was winning. As the lights dimmed over society and Holden Novak continued to circle the periphery of power and ambition, the fate of the Newmans, the Copelands, and the entire city hung in delicate balance. Because when the truth comes, when every hidden memory, buried identity, and whispered secret is finally unearthed, there is no telling who will survive the reckoning. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, the seconds stretched like lifetimes. Every beep of the heart monitor, every shallow breath, every movement was a painful reminder of what was slipping away. Cole, once vibrant and full of fire, lay in a fragile stillness, surrounded by the two women who represented everything he'd lost and everything he'd rediscovered. His daughter, Claire, sat beside him, gripping his hand with trembling fingers as if sheer force of will could tether him to this world a little longer. Her voice cracked with desperation, not anger but sorrow, as she pleaded with him not to give up. She couldn't accept that the man she had only recently begun to call father would leave her now, not when they had finally opened their hearts to one another. She spoke of everything they had missed, all the years lost to lies and silence, and the injustice of finally finding each other only to be ripped apart by time's cruel indifference. Cole, though weakened beyond measure, looked at her with eyes full of love and pride. He told her gently that she still had her mother. That he had already been given more than he deserved, a second chance to love her, to know her, to be called her father. That was enough. That was everything. His voice was faint, his tone resigned, but his love was unwavering. Claire, shattered by the reality crashing down around her, begged him not to break her heart. She said she couldn't bear it, not after everything they had shared, everything they had overcome. She told him that even if she let go, Victoria never would, and that he owed it to them, to her, to fight. Her tears streamed freely now, raw and unstoppable, as she clung to the fleeting hope that maybe, just maybe, love could rewrite fate. Cole looked at her, memorizing her face, etching every tear, every word, into memory. He whispered that he was thankful beyond words for the time they had been given, that in a world full of regrets, meeting her again had been his redemption. Claire couldn't take it anymore. The weight was too heavy, the room too small to hold her grief. She stood abruptly and fled, unable to stay, unable to watch as the man she had just begun to truly love slipped further into the distance. Victoria remained behind, the air thick with silence and history. She stood by Cole's bedside, unable to speak for a long moment. Her eyes never left his face. She saw him not just as he was now, but as he had been in 100 memories, the young man who once held her hand in the vineyards of Tuscany, the father of the child they never got to raise, the soul who knew her heart before it was broken by the world. She told him she didn't believe in fairy tales anymore. That happily ever afters were stories told to children, not lived by people like them. And yet, she admitted that a part of her had hoped. Hoped that somehow, in some small miracle, they could reclaim what was stolen from them. But she wouldn't ask him to stay. She wouldn't burden him with guilt or demand the impossible. She only asked for one thing, one final kiss. One last memory to carry with her through the years ahead. Cole smiled, weak but sincere, and told her he wanted nothing more. And as their lips met, it wasn't just a goodbye. It was the end of a lifetime, the closing of a chapter that had remained unfinished for too long. It was forgiveness, love, grief, and peace all at once. And when she pulled away, his eyes closed for the last time. Later, as the weight of loss settled heavily over them, Claire and Victoria found themselves standing in the old storage house where so many of their hidden truths had been unearthed. The air was musty, but the place felt sacred now, like a shrine to the memory of the man they had both loved in different ways. Claire asked softly if Victoria believed in heaven, in something beyond the cold finality of death. Victoria paused, her voice thick but sure, and said that she did. That she had to. That somewhere, Cole was at peace. Claire nodded, placing a hand over her heart. She said she would carry him there, always. That no matter what the world said, no matter how much time passed, he would live on through her. In every word she spoke, in every step she took, in every truth she chose to embrace rather than run from. The days that followed were wrapped in silence, broken only by the sounds of mourning and the questions that inevitably rose from the ashes of a man gone too soon. But for Victoria, the world felt like it had lost its color. She moved through it like a shadow of herself, performing routines she no longer cared about, sitting in meetings that meant nothing, and returning to a home that felt colder with every breath. She thought often of Cole's final words, their second chance, their almost fairy tale, and how life had stolen it all just when it was within reach. And yet, amid the grief, there was a strange sense of grace. Because he had died knowing he was loved. He had died forgiven. And perhaps, in a world as broken as theirs, that was as close to a miracle as anyone could hope for. Claire, too, felt changed. Her anger had dulled, replaced by something deeper and more grounded. She walked through the streets of Genoa City differently now, aware of her father's legacy not as a weight but as a thread woven into her being. She visited the places he once loved. She spoke to Victoria more often, not out of obligation, but from a need to connect. The pain hadn't vanished. It likely never would, but it had evolved. Into something bearable. Into something that reminded her she had survived worse and would survive this too. And in quiet moments, when the world grew still, she closed her eyes and pictured Cole standing beneath the sky, smiling, free. Some wounds don't heal. They become part of us. And as mother and daughter stood together in the pale morning light, hands clasped, eyes lifted toward a horizon they could not yet see, they understood something profound. Loss doesn't end the story. It changes it. It shapes it. And sometimes, it gives birth to a new chapter neither had expected to write. One built not on what was taken from them, but on what still remained: love, memory, and the quiet strength to move forward, even when their hearts still broke with every step.